Hi everyone. In this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played between Alexander Alekhine and Emanuel Lasker. This game was played in the 1934 Zurich International Tournament in Zurich, Switzerland, and without further ado, let's look at this game. Alekhine starts the game off by playing the move d4, and now d5 by Lasker. c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, bishop e7, and now bishop g5, knight bd7, and e3. So the classical variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. Castles, rook c1, and now c6. Normal development, and this is what you would usually see in a Slav or semi-Slav position. So bishop d3, and a normal move that many people would play. Once you develop your bishop out, d takes c4 will be played. And it's just to gain a tempo on the bishop. And after bishop takes c4, you'll usually see the move b5 being played. Well, in this game, Lasker plays a different move, knight to d5. And knight d5 is played with the intention of trying to swap more pieces off the board. And bishop takes e7 is played, and queen takes e7 by Lasker. And Lasker wants the trade on d5 to happen, mainly because it'll benefit his light-squared bishop. You might be wondering why I'm saying that. Well, it's because if knight takes d5 is played, then after e takes d5, this bishop must move somewhere. So let's say it moves to b3. After knight f6, or any other knight move, but preferably knight f6, this bishop can develop to any of these squares, maybe f5, g4, depending on the circumstances of the position, but it'll help the light-squared bishop a lot. And that is what you must try to do a lot in d4 openings, because the bishop will always get trapped behind the pawns, so freeing it is obviously what you should try to do. So instead of playing knight takes d5, knight e4 was played by Alekhine. He just wants to transfer his knight to the side of the board where Lasker has castled. Knight 5 to f6. Lasker knows that Alekhine is not going to be trading pieces now, so he might as well just trade the knights here. Well, Alekhine still does not want to do that. He plays the move knight g3. And after knight g3 was played, an interesting move was played by Lasker. He played e5, and it's quite curious why he would play such a move, especially considering the fact that he just allowed the knight to hop into the f5 square. But there are some positives to this move. First of all, it tries to develop the c8 bishop, and it also does give opportunities for more piece exchanges, which is, if you can notice, what Lasker wants. Mainly because there is a better space advantage for Alekhine, and usually principles will state that if you have a better space advantage, then you do not want to exchange as many pieces, which is why Alekhine has been declining some of the trades you might see on the d5 square and also on the f6 square. And generally, if you are having less space, then you want to exchange more pieces. So that is what Lasker is trying to do, whereas Alekhine is trying to do the opposite. We have castles, and now e takes d4. And you might be thinking, well, now you could just take the pawn immediately, right? Well, instead of doing that, Alekhine has a better idea. You indeed could play e takes d4, which would leave you with an isolated queen pawn, but instead, Alekhine doesn't want that. He plays the move knight f5. And this is what I was talking about, how vulnerable the f5 square is. The queen goes back to d8, and now knight from f3 captures on d4. And the knight has been improved, and there's also a very weak square on d6. If this square can be taken advantage of, then there's a chance that Alekhine will stand a lot better. I mean, the d6 square is the weakest in the position, so why not take advantage of this? Knight e5 was played in the game, trying to perhaps play the move c5 and offer a few more traits. Bishop b3, and now bishop f5, knight f5, and an interesting move you might be thinking. Queen b6. I was just mentioning a moment ago that the more cramped you are in a position, the more you want to exchange pieces. Well, now you might be thinking, why didn't Lasker do that? I mean, he had the opportunity to trade queens. Well, when I say pieces, I necessarily mean minor pieces. I don't mean major pieces. Because if the queen is not there to guard the certain weak squares and the extra space that Alekhine has, then it'll be a lot harder for the rooks and knights to control that. So, queen d6 was played. Near knight ed7. Black wants to somehow transfer his knight to a better square. Knight g6 could be played, indeed, trying to maybe transfer the knight somewhere else, but at the moment that wouldn't be a good idea, mainly because there's this knight h6 check option. And after knight h6 check, g takes h6 would be played, and after queen takes f6, if we just look at the position from a glance, we can already say two things. First of all, that Lasker's not going to have a good pawn structure for the rest of the game, and we can also say that it's a lot easier for Alekhine to bring pieces into the game. For instance, you could be looking at moves like rook c4, and then rook g4, and follow it up with h4 and h5, perhaps. And also because of the power of this b3 bishop, there are more tactics involved. For instance, this f7 pawn is pinned, so an idea like rook c4, rook g4, and even rook g6 could be playable. And after hd6, queen g6, king h8, and queen h6, the position is already too much better for Alekhine that it's hard to find out what Lasker has left. Instead of playing the move knight g6, we have knight ed7. And knight ed7 is just trying to defend the f6 knight. Rook fd1 is played, with the idea of probably playing something like queen e7, and then rook takes d7. So rook ad8, trying to defend. Queen g3, and now g6, because there was mate threatened. And queen g5 was played here, mainly because there are ideas now of playing the move knight e7 check, but also because now h4 and h5 become possible. Another idea with queen g5 is to put more pressure on this d7 knight. For instance, you could play rook d6 followed by rook d1, and also because queen g5 is played, you're also getting ideas of putting pressure on the f6 knight. And with the amount of pressure building up on the position, it's hard to find out what is really going to be played from Lasker. King h8 was played in the game, trying to avoid all of this. Knight d6, and now king g7. Of course, this seems logical because you do not want to lose the f7 pawn, but now e4. And the idea of e4 is to play e5, and essentially just get rid of the knight on f6, because that knight on f6 is the main guardian of the entire kingside. So knight g8 was played, and now rook d3. So trying to reroute the rook to a square where it could potentially be attacking the king with its full power. f6 was played, but this move just loses the game on the spot. A better move that could have been tried was knight d to f6. And perhaps the idea could be that if you play something like rook c to d1, then perhaps you could try this option. Rook takes d6, rook takes d6, queen takes f2 check, and after king takes f2, knight takes e4 check, and let's say king g1, knight takes g5. Maybe you could still hold the position. It's a bit hard to say whether or not this is actually playable, but it would have given Lasker at least a better chance than what happened in the game. In the game, after f6 was played, Alekhine punished him dearly. He played knight f5 check. And there's only one move for this king to go. There's only one square for this king to go to, since the pawn on g6 is pinned, and that's h8. And at the moment, the king might seem very safe on h8, but this is an entire bluff, and I encourage you to pause the video and find out what Alekhine played that just wins the game on the spot. Okay, so Alekhine played the move queen takes g6. And the idea is that, well, you're trying to open up the h file, and because of the lack of squares that the king has, it may even result in checkmate. So, of course, there's the threat of queen g7, checkmate, and there's hardly any way to really defend against that, since rook f7 would just allow queen takes f7 to be played, and there's still queen g7 being threatened. So what happens if you capture the queen? Well, if you do this, then after rook h3 check is played, there's no way of defending the position anymore. You can try knight h6, but this will not end up well, because of rook takes h6, and this is checkmate. You can see that the bishop guards this diagonal, knight guards g7, and the rook guards h7. So a very nice checkmate this would be, and hence, after the move queen takes g6 was played, Emmanuel Lasker resigned the game, and a brilliant victory for Alexander Alekhine. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.